Hello, this is Jasmine, and I've got a cheap art supply challenge today. So I went to Walmart the other day and I saw all of this back to school stuff, and I just couldn't help myself. I always want to get it, but I have no excuse to. But since I'm doing a video, it gives me an excuse. It's so cheap, and I'm pretty certain I can make some decent artwork with this. So the challenge I'm setting myself is to make an actual really good piece of artwork that I would consider, to look professional and on par with my other works. So what I got was, for 50 cents, I got some cra-z-art markers, and they're water-based, so they're not going to be great, but I figured I can use them for accents and stuff. These were slightly more expensive than most things. These were $1.74 for these mechanical pencils, but that's about the same price as me buying a pack of regular pencils and a pencil sharpener. They were about $1 a piece. So I thought these were really cute. They came in a bunch of colors. They have replacement lead and cute colorful erasers, which hopefully work. And they're this Pen and Gear brand, which I believe is a Walmart's office supply brand. This one I'm really nervous about, so I figured I'd probably do the bulk of the piece in watercolor, because I've been doing a lot of watercolor lately. And I was going to, these are 97 cents, I was going to get a separate set of brushes for like $2, was the cheapest I could find it, because I know that these have terrible plastic bristle brushes most of the time, and I don't have high hopes for cra-z-art brand. But I forgot to buy the brushes after looking around for the cheapest ones and realizing I'd have to go back. So I'm stuck with the plastic bristle brush, but we'll make it work. This is a cheap art supply challenge. Let's see what we can do. I've heard very bad things about these, but 50 cents was the cra-z-art colored pencils. I also got a thing of Crayola colored pencils, which were $1, and I figured I'd do a comparison in a different video. Oh no, my lap's getting full. I thought that colored pencil, or colored crayons, that is, could add some texture and some interest to a piece. I wouldn't do a full piece in colored crayon, probably, because I'm not fond of the texture, but it could be interesting, and these were only 25 cents, so why not? For line work, I got these 97-cent just ballpoint pens, Bic ballpoint pens, and these will be useful regardless, but they should work fine. I really like working with ballpoint pens. Now, the most expensive item I got was $3.97 for this pad of paper, and that's because the cheapest pad of paper I could find, like actual sketchbook paper, was $3, so 97 cents cheaper, and it had more paper, but the paper was see-through. And we're doing a cheap art supply challenge, but we're also still trying to make it look like a decent piece. And this stuff, this is a paint pad, actually has decently thick paper. So it's got 20 sheets, I believe. Yeah, 20. And I should be able to make something decent for this, especially since it's Strathmore brand. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get into sketching up some ideas, keeping in mind the colors and the supplies that I have to work with, and we'll see what we can come up with. To start off, I did swatches, of course, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that all of the materials, except for the mechanical pencils, were much better than I expected them to be, especially the cra-z-art stuff. So the mechanical pencils were, they were basically just your cheapo mechanical pencils. I was honestly just really glad that the eraser worked and didn't leave color on the page. But the crayons, the markers, the paper, the pen was a regular pen. It was all really good, and I really pigmented, which surprised me. The watercolors surprised me the most, because I remember using these watercolors when I was younger, and they were very non-pigmented. I don't know if it was how I used them back then, because I was little, or if they changed up the formula, but they were very nice, as you can see, not even very chalky. And the markers were very nice and pigmented. They didn't tear up the paper very much at all in these swatches. And I enjoyed going back over with some water to see what I could do with the markers and the pen. The pen didn't really move very much with water, but the markers blended beautifully. And I want to point out to anyone that is struggling with money when it comes to art supplies and stuff, how much of a gimmick watercolor markers are if you're after a watercolor marker type supply, because all water-based markers, at least most water-based markers, are going to react just like this. Look, you can barely even see the original line I made. It's not perfect, but neither are these so-called watercolor markers. When I finished the sketch of my channel mascot here, whom I currently just refer to as Lily-Pad Girl, gotta come up with like an actual name for her, I went straight in and I dampened all of the areas of her skin with water first, and then I went in with the watercolor. So I dampened the paper first just to help it spread in case it was going to dry immediately and I would get too many hard edges. I did get quite a few hard edges, as you'll see later on, but for the most part it laid down pretty nice. It wasn't perfectly smooth, but for like less than $1 worth of watercolor paint, this was very nice to work with. The paper didn't buckle too much, but I did make sure that I was using as very little water as possible. Like, I didn't want too much. I didn't want to risk that the paper was just completely gonna buckle, but the paper is very nice so far. It's been working really well. I went down with a base using a mixture of the red, which was more like a pink, so about half and half with the red and the orange, and then I added just a tiny bit of the yellow to give myself a nice bright skin tone. First I tried to add a little bit of blue, but with these cheaper watercolors that seemed to either I got too much or it just muddied it a little too much. It still came out with a very nice brown that I could use later on for maybe a shadow color. I haven't decided quite yet at this point in time in the drawing. After a flat base of color, I went in with the same pigment and just darkened up some areas to act as shadows and give a little variation in the skin. I also picked up some red to add a little bit of blush to the face and the ear and a couple other areas. And I may have gone a little overboard with the face. I feel like I muddied it up a little, but not too bad. I feel like we can fix this later on, probably with the colored pencils. After the base layer of cra-z-art watercolors, I went in with the cra-z-art markers. If I didn't layer these up too much, there was no tearing of the paper at all, and I knew this would be the case, so I just didn't even try to layer them up. What I did for this was I just put down some light lines of color, and then I went over it with water to reactivate it the way that watercolor would be. In this way, I'm not hurting the fiber of the paper as much, and if I want to, which I almost definitely will, I can go in with more layers of the marker or go straight in with the marker for like shadows and more definition. And I thought this worked out pretty well. You can definitely still see the lines of the marker, which you couldn't as much on my little swatch page, but I didn't lay the marker down nearly as thick. If I had laid the marker down just in big, wide strokes, I'm sure I could have pushed the line of the marker away with the water. I also didn't use as much water because I noticed with my swatches that I would get hard edges if I used too much water. But I think that this part turned out pretty well. I'm going in with a rainbow of colors. It looks really bright and intense right now. And although it is supposed to be bright and intense, a lot of that will get toned down later with colored pencils, or less toned down but more mixed together, so it won't look as stark as it does right now. And there'll be some bounce lighting on the skin and other variations within the painting that will make it a more cohesive piece, I hope. I go in with the water strategically. I'm still using this not great cra-z-art paintbrush, but still far better than the quality that they used to have. And I'm blending the colors together that are closest first. So like a pink and a purple, and then I would go from purple to blue because I don't accidentally want to muddy any of the other colors. A quick update during this kitty intermission. Things are about to change a lot as far as setup goes, because between the time that I first started working on this and I start finishing it next, I've moved my desk and I'm working in a different lighting situation, so it's all gonna look a little different now. I also lost the markers, but luckily I was pretty much done with those, so I have no idea where those went. But back to the art. This next part presented some difficulty because the paintbrush was just not great. The big issue was that the plastic bristles don't absorb water or don't hold water. So I was trying the technique where you wet the paper first and then drop in the pigment so that I would get a softer gradation, and I ended up with a bit of a gradation, but not as easily as I would have with a regular paintbrush. I went in with a teal that I made for the water with the brightest blue that I had mixed with some yellow, and I may have used a tiny bit of green to tone that down. But after that, I went in with the background, which I know was my teal kind of color mixed with some brown to tone it down. The crown was one of the parts that I was the most nervous about because I wasn't sure that I would be able to pull it off and make it look like crystals. In the end, I do think it turned out really good, especially since I've never really painted a crown before. So that was a trial, but I do think that it turned out really pretty. I really like the overall way that the background turned out, how I went in just all around the edges with the kind of olive greenish color, and then I saved a bright splash of pure yellow for the center. I just think that turned out really pretty, and it worked out well with the crystals of the crown on her head, which I did in straight brown, but I kind of diluted it as much as I could. The colored pencils were one of the things that I was the most disappointed in. Like, they were okay for straight up sketching with or whatever you'd want to do with them, but they're not opaque at all. So I thought that the yellow might show up over the top of some things, or like the lighter pigment of the purple might show up on top of the darker paint, that kind of thing, to make highlights, but unfortunately it didn't at all. They still worked really well for adding a little bit of detail here and there, some shadow and a little bit of line work, which was really good, but they just didn't quite live up to what I wanted to use them for. I should have known, since they don't even come with a white. But they still did all right. They're cra-z-art colored pencils, so what can you really expect? But I believe that if I went into this painting again, or this artwork, I would probably almost exclusively use the paints and the markers diluted as paints, as well as the pen. I think those would be the primary two things I used. I might use the crayons a little bit, but honestly, probably not. Surprisingly to me, the color crayons really came in clutch to fill in and smooth out some of the areas, especially in the hair. I didn't really use them in like the water or anything like that. Not that I can remember. I may have a little bit here and there, but they really helped smooth out the hair. From the side, they have a bit of a waxy sheen because they're wax, but from the front, you can't really even tell that. And I think especially the lighter colors, like the yellow and whatnot, really helped out. Unfortunately, the darker colors, I didn't realize that the color crayon dust that it makes, it's not like the dust of other mediums where you just like kind of blow it off or brush it off. If you're lucky, it will, but it sticks really easily. And then I had little dark specks here and there that I couldn't do anything about. And I'm sure that the light colored stuff does that as well, but it's definitely not noticeable. But all in all, the color crayons did about what I expected them to. I laid down some solid but transparent, again, colors. I'm not sure if higher quality color crayons are more opaque or not, but these ones were definitely not opaque. I wound up going in and painting the eyes blue, which unfortunately I didn't have my reference out here, and I totally forgot that her eyes are actually yellow. So there's no real going back on that. I don't have any opaque art mediums here. Everything here was fairly transparent. I also accidentally covered up the white of the eye because that's not something I think about very much. I usually go back in and color the white of the eye with paint or a gel pen or something like that. I don't really worry about it, but I guess I should have. It still turned out all right, I think, but it definitely could have been better. I added final details with the Bic pen, and that's where the piece really pulls together. I love the way it looks with the outlines. I darkened the eyes. That's one of the things that was bothering me for quite a while, is just the blank dead stare, because the eyelashes just weren't dark enough even with the colored pencil. And doing outlines here and there, like really sparsely. I don't really work with heavy outlines, but for this piece I mean, quite frequently I don't work with outlines at all, but for this piece I thought it was really necessary. And I really like the way that it looks in the end. Yeah, once the piece is all completed, could I do better with higher quality supplies? Definitely, of course I could. But is this a piece that I really like? Yeah, I really like this piece. I think it's really cute. It's gonna need some minimal touch up if I want to actually sell it as a print or anything like that. But do I think that it's high enough quality to be sold as a print? Absolutely, which is great because the art supplies was, again, extremely cheap. Surprisingly, the paper also did not buckle too much. I had it taped down there at the end, and I put quite a lot of water, as you can see in the painting portion of the video, and it held together really well. It didn't buckle too much. It didn't have much pooling or anything like that. So all in all, this was a very it was a frustrating experience, but it was also fun. It was just a regular old drawing experience, but the tools kind of fought me a little bit. Not too bad though. I hope you guys really like watching this. Maybe I'll do another cheap art supply challenge or something else if you guys have any suggestions. Again, I have those Crayola pencils, but I'll also be offering this artwork as a coloring page for anyone that wants it. That will be up on my Patreon. You don't have to subscribe to my Patreon to be able to see it. It'll be free for everyone. But if you would like to support my Patreon, that's always great. That's Jay-Z Fantasy Art. But otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Jasmine Selmer, or you can find me on other socials as Jay-Z Fantasy Art. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed this, and thanks for stopping by.